May I have your leftovers, sir? But when the millionaire looked into her eyes, a miracle happened. The wind along Market Street was unforgiving that morning, whipping past glass buildings and scattering discarded papers across the concrete. Emily Carter, 27, wrapped her threadbare coat tighter around herself as she moved with purpose but without destination. Her shoes, once white and designed for long shifts in hospital corridors, now bore the wear of city streets and endless steps taken in search of food, safety, and a remnant of dignity. San Francisco had changed over the years, but perhaps not as much as she had. Once a student of nursing with steady hands and big dreams, Emily had been full of potential. Her professors had often praised her calm under pressure and her innate ability to comfort even the most distressed patients. But fate had dealt her a brutal hand. Her mother's sudden cancer diagnosis had drained every bit of savings, and the medical bills that followed swallowed whatever was left of their modest life. Her father, already distant, disappeared for good soon after, unable to cope with the weight of responsibility. Then came the eviction, the final semester she had to drop out of, and the job she couldn't keep without a permanent address. Now, her life unfolded day by day, moment to moment. She knew where the shelters were, which convenience stores let you use the bathroom without questions, and which alleys were safest at night. Even with the hardships, she remained fiercely kind. She shared what little she had, offered help to others in similar situations, and never once begged aggressively or cursed at those who passed her by with cold indifference. Her eyes, a soft hazel, held a quiet sadness that spoke louder than any plea. That morning, her stomach rumbled, a reminder that she hadn't eaten since the half-bagel someone had tossed her way the previous afternoon. She walked past Union Square, her gaze scanning the usual places, the benches, the bins, the shadows under scaffolding. Then something made her stop. It wasn't a sound, nor a smell, but a presence. To her left stood a restaurant she'd passed 100 times before. Barkley and Sons. It was one of those places with high windows, clean lines, and a discreet luxury that only the well-off truly noticed. Inside, waiters in black vests moved with practiced grace, and people in suits spoke in low, comfortable tones over porcelain plates. Emily didn't approach. Not at first. She just stood across the street, her eyes fixed on the scene beyond the glass. She wasn't watching the food or the wealth. She was watching the people, how relaxed they were, how separate from the world she lived in. And yet, there was no bitterness in her gaze. Just curiosity. Maybe a touch of longing. She stepped closer. A few feet from the entrance, a man exited the restaurant alone. He appeared in his late 40s. Tall, with silver strands at his temples and a trimmed beard. His navy overcoat was tailored and expensive, his leather shoes recently shined. In one hand, he carried a takeout box. He walked a short distance, then sat on a bench facing the square. Emily hesitated. There was something about his posture, he wasn't looking at his phone or speaking into an earpiece. He was just sitting, lost in thought, with the box resting on his lap. She took a deep breath and crossed the street. Her heart pounded harder with each step. She hated asking. It chipped away at her pride every time. But hunger was louder than pride today. She approached slowly, stopping a respectful distance away. "Excuse me," she said gently, her voice almost lost in the wind. The man looked up, surprised but not annoyed. Emily offered the smallest of smiles. "May I have your leftovers, sir?" There was a moment, a long one, where neither moved. The man looked at her face, not in The way most did, trying to calculate her story or assess her worth. His eyes didn't flicker with pity or judgment. Instead, something changed in his expression. A stillness settled over him, as if he had seen something familiar in her that pulled him away from the present moment. Emily waited. Then, softly, he replied, "Of course." He extended the box to her without hesitation, and as she reached for it, their eyes met for the first time. Something passed between them. A flicker. A recognition neither could explain. Emily nodded in gratitude. "Thank you." But instead of leaving, the man said, "Would you sit with me? Just for a minute?" She blinked, unsure. No one had ever asked her that. Not strangers, not even those who gave her things. For a brief second, she considered walking away. But something, curiosity, hunger, or maybe just the kindness in his voice, made her accept. She sat beside him, cautious but calm, and opened the box slowly. The scent of roasted chicken and herbs rose in the air. Her hands trembled slightly, not from fear, but from the overwhelming relief of having real food again. "I'm Daniel," the man said. She glanced at him, still unsure. "Emily." He nodded thoughtfully. "Nice to meet you, Emily." They sat in silence for a few seconds more. Then Daniel said, "I had a sister once. She used to sit like that, shoulders curled in, always thinking more than she spoke." Emily paused in her chewing. She hadn't expected this. People didn't share stories with her anymore. "I lost her a long time ago," he added, his voice quieter now. Emily looked at him again, and for the first time, he seemed less like a man in a tailored coat, and more like someone carrying grief. The wind picked up again, scattering leaves across their feet. Neither of them noticed. Emily sat cautiously at the edge of the bench, the weight of the takeout box balanced on her knees. The food inside was warm, fragrant, something prepared with care, not pulled from a bin or passed through a window in exchange for spare coins. Daniel, still seated beside her, watched without staring, as if trying to respect a boundary that hadn't been defined but was clearly there. He wasn't used to this kind of interaction, and yet something in her quiet dignity anchored him in the moment, keeping him from retreating into the safety of silence. As she took her first bite, her eyes fluttered shut briefly, not for effect, not for drama, but because the taste overwhelmed her. Her body reacted faster than her thoughts, grateful in a way that could not be described. When she opened her eyes again, Daniel was still there, his expression unreadable. "You didn't have to offer it," she said after swallowing, her voice soft but clear. "Wouldn't most people?" Daniel's reply was immediate but gentle. "Most people don't know what they're looking at." Emily's brow furrowed slightly, unsure what he meant, but she didn't press. It was enough that he hadn't walked away or responded with discomfort. She continued eating in small, measured bites, trying not to devour the meal too quickly, aware that each bite might be the last for a while. "You said your name's Emily, right?" Daniel asked, turning slightly toward her. She nodded without looking up. "I've never seen you around here before." "I move a lot," she answered, wiping the side of her mouth with a napkin he had tucked into the box. "Can't stay in the same place too long. People start noticing." He didn't ask why that mattered. She appreciated that. Most who asked didn't really care about the answer, they just wanted to hear something that made them feel better about ignoring it. Daniel sat back, stretching one leg forward and resting his hands in his lap. "Someone," he said, voice distant now. "You remind me of." Emily didn't respond. She'd heard that before, too. It often led to awkward comparisons or uncomfortable offers. But Daniel said no more. They sat in silence again, two people from utterly different lives, momentarily sharing the same breath, the same sunlight, the same city noise vibrating in the air. After a few more bites, Emily carefully closed the box, saving the rest. It wasn't just about hunger, it was about making it last, preserving something good for later. She placed it beside her on the bench. "Do you work nearby?" she asked, surprising herself. She rarely engaged beyond the "thank you." Daniel tilted his head slightly. "Back to a meeting?" "Something like that. I was just having a late lunch before heading." She nodded, unsure why she'd asked in the first place. The words had simply slipped out. Maybe because he didn't feel threatening, maybe because she wanted to delay the moment when she'd have to stand up and return to the rhythm of the street. Daniel looked at his watch, then at her. His eyes were steady, not the kind that flinched when met. "Can I ask you something?" he said, his voice measured. She nodded again, cautious now. "Would you come back inside and eat with me? Properly. At a table?" Emily blinked. "Inside?" He nodded. "Yes. As my guest." She stared at him for a long moment, uncertain if she'd misheard. "Leftovers. That's already more than enough. You just gave me your—" "I know. But I'd rather talk somewhere warm. And maybe with a second course." There was no arrogance in his voice, no pity either. Just sincerity, which made it even more disorienting. "Why?" she asked. He hesitated, then answered. "Because I feel like I'm supposed to." Emily stood slowly, her posture tense. "I'm not a project," she said quietly. "I didn't say you were." The moment hung between them like a taut string, either about to snap or soften. Emily weighed her options, considered her instincts, all of which had kept her safe this long. Still, something in Daniel's demeanor pushed back against her usual defenses. Not in a demanding way, but with unexpected gentleness. "I don't belong in a place like that," she said, glancing back at the restaurant. "They'll stare." "They can stare," Daniel replied. "We'll be eating." Another long silence. "Just dinner," he added. "Then you go your way. I go mine." Emily looked down at her hands. Her fingers were thin, her nails short and clean. She nodded. "Once." "Okay," she said. "Just dinner." They crossed the street together. Daniel held the door open for her, but didn't guide her, didn't touch her. Inside, the lighting was soft and golden, casting a warm glow on polished wood and crisp linens. The hostess blinked when she saw them, and for a split second, her mouth parted, as if to speak. But Daniel's steady presence silenced whatever judgment had been forming. "Table for two," he said with calm authority. The hostess nodded slowly, leading them to a quiet corner. Emily walked slightly behind her. Step small but firm. She didn't shrink, didn't flinch. She had nothing to prove, but she carried herself with a poise that came from surviving, from enduring. Seated at the table, she kept her eyes low, hands folded. The menu arrived, but Daniel waved it off gently. "We'll just have two of what I ordered earlier," he said. The waiter, young and visibly uncertain, nodded and left. The clink of glasses and hum of conversation filled the space around them. Emily spoke first. "Me, what went wrong with my life? This isn't going to be one of those things, is it? Where you feed me and ask." Daniel shook his head. "No. But I would like to hear your story. If you want to tell it." She looked up. You first. He smiled faintly. That's fair. And so he did. Not in grand detail, not with drama, but in broad strokes. A man who had worked too hard, lost things along the way, and found himself staring at success and wondering if it was enough. When she spoke, it was with care. Not everything. Not the worst parts. But enough. Enough for Daniel to begin understanding the depth behind her eyes, the gravity of her world. By the time dessert arrived, something had shifted, not friendship, not yet. But a foundation. Fragile and real, had taken shape between them. A space where trust might grow. They left the restaurant together, back into the chilled evening. Emily clutched the second takeout box, not for survival this time, but for comfort. Then, just before they reached the sidewalk, Daniel turned to her. I'd like to offer you something else, he said. Emily stopped walking. What? A place to stay. Just for a few nights. Nothing more. Her eyes narrowed. Why would you do that? He hesitated, then answered simply. Because I think you were supposed to find me today. Emily didn't respond right away. Her breath came out in small clouds. The city hummed around them, the night alive with motion. I'll think about it, she said finally. And for the first time in a long time, she meant it. The car moved steadily through the darkened streets of San Francisco, headlights casting shadows that danced across building facades and traffic signs. Daniel's vehicle, a sleek but unostentatious sedan, moved quietly, almost respectfully, as if aware of the weight of the moment unfolding inside it. Emily sat in the passenger seat, her fingers resting lightly on the edge of her coat, gaze focused on the city rushing past. She had not said much since leaving the restaurant, and neither had Daniel. The silence between them wasn't awkward, it was dense, thick with questions unasked, with thoughts too heavy for casual conversation. She hadn't intended to accept his offer, not when he made it. She had even started to walk away, telling herself that kindness from a stranger was one thing, but accepting a place to stay was something entirely different. Yet her feet hadn't taken her far before a strange sensation crept in, not fear, not suspicion, but something she hadn't felt in a long time. Safety. Not in the offer itself, but in the way it was made. Without pressure. Without expectation. Now, seated beside this man who had first offered her food without hesitation, she tried to keep her guard up. She had to. Life had taught her that even the purest moments could sour quickly. Still, there was something about Daniel that unsettled her, not in a dangerous way, but in how easily he made her want to believe in decency again. Daniel glanced at her from the corner of his eye. He hadn't pushed her to talk since they left the restaurant. Something in her face, in the way she held herself, told him that this wasn't someone who trusted easily. He respected that. Still, her presence stirred something deep in him. Something he hadn't felt in years. The shape of her expression, the cadence of her voice, it all reminded him of a person whose memory had lived quietly in the back of his mind, undisturbed. Until now. You said you studied nursing, he said suddenly, his voice low. Emily turned her head slightly, not fully facing him. Months left. Yeah. I was almost done. Had just a few. What happened? The question wasn't invasive. It was simple, but the answer wasn't. Everything. She replied. Life happened. My mom got sick. I had to work more. Then we couldn't pay rent. Then I couldn't pay tuition. One thing after another. Daniel nodded slowly. And no one helped. People helped. But not enough. Or not for long. That's the thing with help, it usually comes with limits. He felt the truth in her words. He had seen it before, in boardrooms and charities and glossy brochures about corporate responsibility. Help offered with strings attached. Aid with expiration dates. I had a sister, he said after a moment. Lindsay. She died when she was 25. Emily didn't speak. The car's hum filled the silence. She was studying to be a nurse, too. Finished her degree, actually. Loved it. Said it was the only job where you're paid to care. Emily turned toward him now, slowly. What happened to her? Daniel's grip on the steering wheel tightened slightly, but his voice remained steady. Accident. Drunk driver. She was on her way home from a night shift. Car. Emily's expression shifted, softened. I'm sorry. Me too. He said. Another pause. She used to sit like you do. He added. Shoulders pulled in. Not because she was weak. But because she was always holding something in, some burden that she didn't want to bother others with. Emily looked down at her hands. She had never met Lindsay, but in that moment, the space inside the car became sacred, bridged by shared loss and invisible threads of memory. The car turned off the main road, entering a quieter, more residential area. Trees lined the sidewalks, their branches heavy with late spring leaves, streetlights casting warm pools of light. On the pavement below, Daniel slowed as they approached a modest two-story house with a brick facade and ivy growing along the front steps. It wasn't a mansion, but it was clearly well kept, with a sense of quiet wealth that didn't scream for attention. He parked the car and turned off the engine. The silence that followed was sharper now, cutting through the night air. I meant what I said, he told her. You can stay a few nights. There's a small guest house out back. It's private. Has everything you'd need. Emily hesitated before speaking. Why me? Daniel didn't answer right away. Then he said. Because I think you crossed my path for a reason. And I haven't believed in that kind of thing for a long time. She looked at him for several seconds, searching his face for deception. She found none. Okay. She said finally. But just for a few nights. They got out of the car. Daniel didn't offer to carry anything. She had only a small backpack. Anyway, the zippers frayed, but still sturdy. He led her through a narrow walkway on the side of the house, motioning toward a detached unit at the back of the property. The guest house was small but well lit, with a porch light already glowing and curtains drawn neatly over the windows. Daniel unlocked the door and handed her the key. You'll have your privacy. I won't bother you. She stepped inside slowly. The space was simple, a clean bed, a small kitchen, a bathroom with folded towels, and a faint scent of lavender soap. She turned back to face him. Thank you. He nodded once. Good night, Emily. He walked away without waiting for a reply. Once he was gone, Emily stood in the middle of the room, unsure what to do with herself. Her instincts screamed that it was too good to be true. Yet her heart whispered something else, that maybe, just maybe, this was a moment where the world tilted in her favor for once. She placed her bag on the floor, sat on the bed, and looked around. Her eyes landed on a bookshelf in the corner. Old paperbacks, a few medical textbooks, and some framed photographs. One caught her attention, a picture of a young woman in nursing scrubs, beaming with a stethoscope draped around her neck. Emily stood and moved closer, picking up the frame. Her heart skipped. The woman in the photo was familiar. Too familiar. It was Lindsay. She wasn't just Daniel's sister. She had been Emily's instructor in nursing school. The one who stayed after class to offer encouragement. The one who wrote her a recommendation letter when she applied for her externship. The one who had told her, in quiet certainty, that she was meant for this work. Emily sat back down, frame still in her hands, the air suddenly thick with 1,000 unsaid things. This wasn't coincidence. This was something else. Emily woke early the next morning, not out of habit, but from years of necessity. She had learned that the early hours offered a rare stillness, a quiet before the city roared to life with the weight of routine, traffic, and expectation. In the guesthouse's modest bed, wrapped in a real blanket with a roof above her head, her senses remained alert, her body conditioned to tension. Even in the presence of comfort. It took several long minutes for her to accept that she was safe, that the room was hers for now, that no one would ask her to leave or question her presence. She sat up and scanned the space again, reconfirming every detail she had memorized the night before. The neat little kitchenette, the folded towels by the bathroom door, the framed photo of Lindsay on the bookshelf, all still there, untouched and steady. She had barely slept. Not because the bed was uncomfortable, but because her mind wouldn't slow down. The recognition of Lindsay had shaken her more than she cared to admit. Her former instructor had been one of the few people in her academic life who truly saw her potential. Lindsay had treated her not as a student barely scraping by, but as a future colleague. She had offered encouragement when Emily's voice trembled during presentations, stood by her when hospital supervisors overlooked her, and defended her when peers dismissed her as a charity case. Seeing her face again, smiling from within that photo frame, had reopened something long buried. Emily showered, the hot water nearly scalding after months of public sinks and hurried wipes. She dressed in her cleanest shirt and pulled her coat over it, still half expecting to be told it was time to move on. Instead, when she stepped outside, Daniel was already on the porch of the main house, a mug in hand, dressed in a gray sweater and jeans that made him look less like an executive and more like someone trying to remember how weekends worked. "Morning," he said, raising the mug slightly in greeting. Emily offered a small nod in return. "Hope the place was all right." "It was fine," she replied. Her voice was neutral, polite, but distant. Daniel motioned toward the door behind him. "I made coffee. Not fancy, but it's hot." She hesitated, then followed him inside. The interior of the house was warm and understated, filled with natural light and the subtle scent of cedar. Books lined the walls in some rooms, photographs and paintings in others. It wasn't a cold, sterile space like she imagined for most wealthy men. It felt lived in. Real. They sat at the kitchen table. Daniel poured her a mug, slid it across, then sat without ceremony. There was no small talk, no interrogation. Just the sound of spoons and mugs and the occasional crackle from the toaster. After a while, Daniel spoke. "You recognized her, didn't you?" Emily looked up. "Lindsay," he clarified. "Last night. The photo." She nodded slowly. "She was my instructor. At the community college." Daniel stared into his coffee. "Attention. I regret that now. She talked about her students all the time. I never paid much. She was kind." Emily said. "Hallway. That's all. Tough, but kind. When she died, they put up a little plaque in the." Silence returned, but it was heavier now. Daniel seemed to wrestle with something, eyes flicking between the tabletop and the window beyond. Emily didn't push. She had learned that silence often said more than words ever could. Later that day, Daniel left for work, leaving Emily in the guesthouse with no instructions, no restrictions. It unsettled her. She was used to boundaries, to rules, to expectations. This absence of control made her feel untethered. She paced the small space, reread pages of old books from the shelf, stared at the photo of Lindsay as if hoping it would offer guidance. When afternoon approached, she sat on the steps of the porch, letting the sun warm her skin. She hadn't done that in years. Not without watching her bag, not without scanning for danger. As dusk fell, Daniel returned, loosening his tie as he walked from the car to the guesthouse. He stood at the bottom step, looking up. "I know it's a bit strange," he said. "But would you have dinner with me again?" Emily arched an eyebrow. "Inside," he added. "My house. I promise it's not a restaurant." She said nothing for a long moment, then nodded. Dinner was simple: roasted vegetables, pasta, a bottle of wine he didn't touch. Emily accepted a glass but barely sipped it. The food was good, but that wasn't why she stayed at the table. Something about the quiet way Daniel moved, the way he listened when she spoke, the lack of performance, it disarmed her. She spoke more this time. Told him about her mother, about the nursing classes she had excelled in, about the externship she almost completed. She avoided the darker parts. He didn't ask. Daniel spoke less but with purpose. He told her about growing up in Oregon, about losing both parents before Lindsay turned 18, about building his business from scratch. He didn't brag. There was no list of accomplishments. Just the thread of a man trying to make sense of the years he had let pass without looking too closely. By the time the plates were cleared, it was dark outside. Emily stood, about to thank him and retreat, when Daniel said, "I want to show you something." She followed him down a hallway, past framed photos of landscapes and distant cities, until they reached a room at the back of the house. He opened the door. Inside was a space she didn't expect. A study, yes, but not one lined with books or trophies. Instead, there were stacks of files, blueprints pinned to the wall, sketches of buildings and floor plans. At the center of it all, a large corkboard filled with notes, clippings, and a single photo, Lindsay, again. Emily stepped closer. This was her idea. Daniel said behind her. A clinic. Small, mobile. For the homeless. Staffed by volunteers and former patients who got back on their feet. She called it Full Circle. Emily stared at the plans, absorbing the details. After she died, I couldn't bring myself to finish it, he said. But now, too painful. Too idealistic, maybe. He didn't finish the sentence. Emily turned to face him. She would have done it, she said. No matter how hard. Daniel nodded. They stood there in the quiet of that room, not as benefactor and guest, not as savior and saved, but as two people carrying grief shaped by the same woman. Two people slowly finding something unspoken between them, a connection, fragile but real, not yet named but deeply understood. Rain fell lightly the next morning, misting the city in a cold silver sheen that softened edges and washed the sidewalks clean. From the window of the guesthouse, Emily watched the droplets slide down the glass, her thoughts caught in the stillness of the moment. She had not planned to stay another night, and yet she had. Not out of dependence or lack of alternatives, but because Something in the atmosphere between her and Daniel remained unresolved. Not romantic, not yet familial, but complex in a way she couldn't name. She had entered his life as a stranger, asking for scraps, but somehow she had found herself in a quiet corner of his world, treated with a dignity she had not known in years. When Daniel knocked on the door later that morning, he carried with him 2 paper cups of coffee and a small brown bag. Emily opened the door without surprise. "Breakfast," he said simply. She accepted it without a word. Inside were 2 bagels, still warm, and a packet of cream cheese. They sat on the porch under the overhang, watching the street beyond the hedge, neither speaking until their food was half gone. "I'm leaving for the office soon," Daniel said eventually. "It'll be a long day." Emily nodded. She assumed this meant he was reminding her of her temporary status here. She didn't blame him. She had stayed longer than intended. "I have a proposal," he continued, catching her off guard. "It's an offer. It's not charity. It's not a handout." She tensed slightly but said nothing. "I want to give you a place to stay for a little longer. Not here, necessarily. Somewhere else. A rental apartment, maybe. Something stable. Just for a while." Emily blinked. Her response came slowly. "Why?" Daniel's gaze didn't shift. "Because I think there's more you can do. I think Lindsay saw something in you that wasn't just talent. And I trust her judgment." She exhaled, a short breath. "You don't even know me." "I'm starting to." She stared out at the street, brows furrowed, unsure what to do with the quiet sincerity in his voice. She had been offered shelter before, but never like this, never with an invitation to rebuild rather than just recover. "I don't want to owe you anything," she said. "You won't," he replied. "I'm not asking for anything. I've heard that before. I mean it." She looked at him then, searching his face for any hint of manipulation, any signal of condescension. But all she found was fatigue and something close to hope. "I need to think," she said. Daniel nodded. "Of course." He stood to leave, brushing crumbs from his coat. "I left a key on the table inside. If you decide to go, just leave it in the mailbox. If you decide to stay a few more days, that's fine too." Emily stood as well, her posture guarded. "What happens if I stay?" Daniel turned at the bottom of the steps, rain settling in his hair. "Then we figure it out." He walked away after that, briefcase in hand, disappearing into the mist like a character exiting stage left. Emily remained on the porch, the coffee cooling in her hands, the bagel half-eaten on the armrest beside her. The day unfolded slowly. She wandered back into the guesthouse, ran her fingers over the books, and sat by the small table with Lindsay's photo once more. The woman in the frame smiled without knowing the ripple her life had caused. Emily wanted to believe that smile had been real, that Lindsay had known joy, even in the shadow of long shifts and eventual tragedy. By late afternoon, the rain had stopped. Emily left the house, walking without direction but not aimlessly. Her feet took her past old places she hadn't dared revisit, an alley behind a clinic where she had once administered CPR to a man overdosing, a bench outside the public library where she had slept for 3 nights under a stolen blanket, a corner by the hospital where she had last seen her mother's eyes close forever. Each step rewound a memory, each corner pulled her deeper into her own past. By the time she returned, it was almost evening. The sky had begun its slow descent into dusk. And the guesthouse glowed softly with the light Daniel had left on for her. She didn't pack. That night, they shared dinner again, this time without ceremony. Leftover pasta, reheated. Vegetables, a loaf of bread cut in thick, uneven slices. There was no need for conversation, not right away. They ate in the quiet rhythm of familiarity, as if this had been happening for weeks, rather than days. Eventually, Daniel leaned back in his chair, exhaling through his nose. "There's another thing," he said. Emily raised her eyes. "I had a call today," he went on. "Something serious. From my lawyer. There's a situation at the company." Her expression shifted subtly. "What kind of situation?" "A financial audit. Unexpected. And connected to one of our newest contracts. There are legal concerns." She listened without comment. "It's not catastrophic, not yet. But it means the next few weeks will be tense." Emily lowered her gaze to the table. "I'm not asking for sympathy," Daniel continued. "What I was offering you. The structure. But it may change some things. The timing of." Emily leaned back slowly. "So this is where the offer disappears?" "No," he said firmly. "Right away. It doesn't. But I may not be able to help in the way I originally intended." "Not." She studied him. "Then why tell me?" "Because I trust you enough to be honest." The words hung in the air longer than they should have. Emily stood and carried her plate to the sink. She rinsed it without being asked, dried it with a towel, and placed it back in the cupboard. Then she turned to face him. "I don't need a sponsor, Daniel," she said. "I need a chance." He nodded slowly. "And I meant to give you one. Then maybe," she said. "We start smaller. One thing at a time." He smiled faintly. "That sounds reasonable." Neither said more. The night stretched between them like a long road, full of turns and intersections not yet visible. Emily returned to the guest house. She didn't sleep right away. She sat by the window, watching the street in silence. The wind had picked up again, but the rain had stopped. Somewhere in the distance, a siren wailed, then faded. A storm was coming, but not the kind that came from clouds. And she had decided to face it, this time not alone. The following days unfolded like the tightening of a slow, invisible coil. Daniel's usually calm demeanor began to shift as subtle cracks formed beneath his polished exterior. He still made time for the small things, coffee in the morning, polite conversation at dinner, but there was an edge to his movements, a sharpness in the way his phone never left his side. The calls came in more frequently now, often lasting late into the night, his voice low and tense behind the closed door of his study. Though he tried to hide it, the strain etched itself into his features, darkened eyes, shorter responses, a quiet that wasn't peace but calculation. Emily noticed everything. She didn't ask questions. She didn't offer comfort. Instead, she adjusted her presence like a shadow, drifting through the house silently when needed, disappearing into the guest house when tension built too thick in the air. It wasn't that she feared him. Daniel had not once made her feel unsafe, but the aura of unease wrapped around him like smoke. Something in his world was shifting, and she didn't want to become a casualty of it. Still, part of her couldn't help but wonder what exactly was unraveling behind the scenes. From the fragments she overheard, mentions of compliance, restructuring, exposure, she understood it wasn't just a financial mishap. This was the kind of crisis that could topple reputations, burn bridges, and erase decades of effort in a matter of weeks. And Daniel, for all his composure, was not immune. One evening, after a long silence and a meal left half-eaten on the kitchen table, Daniel sat down beside her in the living room, rubbing the space between his eyes with 2 fingers. His tie was loosened, his shirt sleeves rolled up, and his voice carried a weariness she hadn't heard before. "They want to bring in outside investigators," he said flatly. "Means this thing, it's real. Not just accountants. Federal." "That." Emily nodded once, listening but not reacting. She didn't know the full scope of what was at stake, but she understood the language of collapse. She had seen it in her own life, slow at first, then all at once. "I might have to sell part of the company," Daniel continued. "The board is starting to splinter. Some of them think distancing themselves from me will protect their investments." She turned her gaze toward the window. "And you? What do you think?" "That I should have seen it coming," he replied. "I let certain deals go unchecked. Trusted the wrong people. Now I'm the one holding the consequences." Emily stood then, slowly, and walked to the kitchen. She returned with 2 glasses of water and handed him one. He took it silently. "What happens to the project?" she asked, voice low. He looked at her. "The one your sister dreamed of," she added. He didn't answer immediately. Then, with a quiet breath, he said, "It goes on pause. At best." The disappointment was sharp but unsurprising. Emily had already suspected as much. Dreams were always the first casualties when survival entered the room. Later that night, as Daniel retreated once more to his study, Emily returned to the guest house. She sat by the small table, pulling out the old notebooks she had started to fill again. She had begun writing in them days ago, at first with hesitation, but slowly, with more purpose. Medical terms, patient scenarios, notes from memory. She couldn't go back to nursing school yet, not without resources or structure, but she could keep the fire lit. That, at least, no crisis could take from her. The next morning brought another kind of complication. Emily was returning from the local corner store, a reusable bag of simple groceries in hand, bread, eggs, an apple or 2, when she noticed the parked car across the street. It was sleek, black, and unfamiliar. The man standing beside it wore a suit too clean for the neighborhood. He wasn't looking at her, not directly, but his presence radiated intention. She entered through the side gate and locked it behind her, unease prickling the back of her neck. Daniel met her outside moments later, his phone still in hand. His face was pale, jaw tight. "They're watching now," he said quietly. "Waiting for a misstep." Emily didn't have to ask who. "I told you," he said. "You don't have to stay." She looked at him evenly. "Do you want me to go?" He didn't answer right away. "No. But it might make things easier for both of us." Emily set the grocery bag down on the porch table. Her voice was calm, almost detached. "Lived under eyes before. Theirs don't scare me. I've..." Daniel leaned against the railing, shoulders heavy. "Me, this arrangement, they'll say it's something it isn't. They'll twist it. You know that. You and..." Emily crossed her arms. "Let them." He studied her. "It's not just my reputation at stake. I've lost that already," she replied. "They can't take what I don't have." For a moment, silence stretched between them, thick with the weight of 2 people trying to hold up worlds that kept tilting. Then Daniel spoke again, his voice quieter. "If this goes badly, I lose everything. Not just money. My name. My access. Everything I've built." "And what if it goes well?" she asked. He didn't respond. That night, news broke. Online headlines flared with speculation, allegations of fraud. Anonymous sources within the company, photographs of Daniel at board meetings paired with ominous captions. But more than that, someone had leaked a photo of him and Emily together. It wasn't intimate. Just the two of them walking side by side, her bag over one shoulder, his hand holding a takeout coffee tray. Still, the implication was clear. The comments were worse. Social media lit up with assumptions, judgments, false narratives. Some called her a grifter. Others called him a predator. The truth didn't matter. The spectacle had begun. Daniel didn't speak for a long time after seeing it. He sat in the dark of his study, the screen's glow casting long shadows on his face. Emily stood in the doorway, watching him without words. "They'll bury me," he said at last. She stepped forward, into the room, into the firestorm that had found them both. "Then we stand in it," she said. "Together." And with those words, something shifted, not just between them, but in the air around them. It was no longer just about help or gratitude. It was about survival. Shared. Chosen. Real. The storm outside had settled into a steady rhythm by morning, tapping softly against the window panes, as if trying to whisper warnings neither of them could hear. Inside the house, silence dominated. Daniel hadn't left for the office. He hadn't even showered. He sat at the kitchen table with a newspaper folded before him, unread, his eyes fixed on some distant point. Beyond the frame of the window, Emily stood across from him, arms crossed, her face composed but far from relaxed. The digital world had exploded overnight, and neither of them had managed to find solid ground since. The photo still trended online, igniting debates in spaces that cared less for truth and more for the performance of outrage. Commentators speculated on Emily's background, some trying to uncover her past, others fabricating it from fragments. Her connection to Daniel was stretched into something scandalous, used to spin narratives about wealth, power, and manipulation. In the minds of strangers, she was already a symbol, either of pity or of threat, but never of her own story. She watched from the guesthouse as headlines grew more vicious, her face shared on screens where it did not belong. That morning, something inside her told her to leave. Not out of fear, but from the instinct to protect. She had done it before, removed herself from spaces when her presence became a liability. But this time felt different. This time, she wasn't just protecting herself. Daniel finally spoke. "On what they find. There's going to be a formal inquiry. Internal first. Then federal, depending." She didn't respond. "I've already received messages from investors. A few have pulled out." Emily sat down slowly across from him. "What are they saying?" "That I've lost control. That I'm letting personal choices compromise the company's image." She met his eyes. "And are you?" Daniel didn't flinch. "No. But it doesn't matter. They'll believe what they want." The simplicity of that statement hit harder than expected. She knew it well, the weight of stories told about you, the helplessness in trying to correct them once they'd taken root. She had lived that reality. She was living it again now. Later that afternoon, unable to endure the tension pressing in from all sides, Emily wandered into the main house, drawn toward the study. The door was slightly ajar. Inside, the plans for Lindsay's clinic still adorned the wall, notes pinned like promises waiting to be fulfilled. Emily moved quietly, examining the details once more. There were maps, staffing models, even early Architectural sketches. In the center was a faded envelope, taped at the corner, with Lindsay's name written in block letters across the front. Curiosity overtook caution. She gently pulled it from the wall and slid the letter from inside. The paper was thin with age. Handwritten in ink now slightly smudged. It wasn't addressed to Daniel, but to someone simply called E. Her hands trembled. She read slowly, each word shaping a memory. "I don't know if you'll ever read this," the letter began. "But I need to write it anyway. You are stronger than you know. You have a way of caring that most people lose when life starts to wear them down. I see it in your eyes. You don't just want to be a nurse, you already are. It's in you. Even when you don't believe it." The rest spoke of encouragement, of moments they'd shared in class, of silent pride Lindsay had never expressed aloud. It was a letter meant for Emily. A letter she had never known existed. A letter that, by some strange turn of fate, had found its way back to her. She stood there frozen, letter in hand, when Daniel appeared in the doorway. "I found that after she died," he said quietly. "Didn't know who it was for until now." Emily looked up, her face unreadable. "Why didn't you tell me?" "I wasn't sure," he said. "About her, I started wondering. I thought maybe I imagined the connection. But after hearing you talk..." Emily folded the letter carefully, returning it to the envelope. "She wrote this before she died." Daniel nodded. "She kept journals. Notes to students. Friends. She believed words could carry people farther than money ever could." Emily swallowed hard. "She believed in me. And so do I." For the first time since the headlines broke, her eyes shimmered with something more than tension, pain, yes, but also recognition. Not just of the loss they both shared, but of the quiet miracle unfolding between them, the unraveling of a narrative that had once been theirs alone. Now tangled and exposed to the world, and yet still deeply personal. That evening, as the city buzzed with curiosity and judgment, Emily sat with Daniel on the back porch. They said little, choosing instead to listen to the rain against the leaves, the wind sweeping through the hedges. Between them sat the letter, now resting on the table between two mugs of untouched tea. "I was 19 when I met her," Emily said eventually. "I was terrified. I'd never set foot in a hospital before. I thought I didn't belong. She knew. She pulled me aside the first week. Said, 'You already know what healing looks like. The rest is just memorization.'" Daniel smiled faintly. "That sounds like her. She gave me the courage to keep going." Emily added. "Falling apart. Even when everything around me was." They sat in silence again. "You're not just here because of her," Daniel said. "I hope you know that." Emily nodded. "But I am here because of her. That part matters." He looked at her then, not as a guest or a symbol of misplaced charity, but as a person whose life had once been gently touched by the same soul that had shaped his own. "What do we do now?" she asked, voice steady. Daniel didn't answer right away. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees, eyes on the distant skyline barely visible through the mist. "We stay the course," he said. "Let the world say what it wants. We know the truth." She glanced at him. "And what is the truth?" "That we were supposed to find each other," he replied. "Something real will grow. And maybe, through all this noise." Emily said nothing, but she didn't look away. The storm wasn't over. More headlines would come. More assumptions. But inside that porch, light's quiet halo, with a letter between them and memories blooming like embers, there was Something no headline could dismantle. A connection. A thread. A truth too quiet for the internet to hear. The pressure reached a crescendo the next morning. The storm that had loomed metaphorically for days took on a literal shape as the skies over San Francisco turned slate gray and angry. Wind slicing through streets with a bite. It seemed fitting. The atmosphere inside Daniel's house mirrored the one outside, unstable, tense, waiting for something to give way. Emily had barely spoken since the night on the porch. She spent her hours inside the guest house, organizing her notes, folding and refolding the same few shirts, trying to steady her breath against the growing certainty that the world outside was preparing to make her disappear. She didn't have a phone. That had been by choice, at first, a symbol of detachment, of independence. But now, it was a void, a dangerous silence. She could only access the internet from Daniel's old desktop, and when she did, she found her face dissected in pixels, her past dragged into public record with no filter, no care. A photo of her high school yearbook picture sat next to a still of her accepting a sandwich in a church shelter 2 years earlier. People speculated on the gaps in her history like archaeologists uncovering fossils. No context. Just assumptions. Daniel tried to shield her from it. He met with attorneys behind closed doors, fielded calls at all hours, and returned each evening with heavier eyes. Still, he didn't ask her to leave. Even when the questions turned uglier, even when journalists showed up outside the gates, even when one tabloid published an opinion piece under the title, Executive's Mistress or Charity Case. Who is the woman in Daniel Whitmore's shadow? He showed her the article in silence. She read it twice, slowly, absorbing each twisted phrase. When she finished, she set the paper down and stood. "I'll pack," she said. Daniel didn't move. No. She stared at him, not angry, not pleading. Just resolute. "This is your world, Daniel. Not mine. I'm not strong enough to be picked apart for being in the wrong photo at the wrong time." "It's not just a photo," he replied. "It's your life. Your story. And they don't get to own it. But they do," she said, voice low. "They've already written the ending." He looked at her, the lines of fatigue drawn deep across his face. "Then let's write something else." She laughed, not from amusement but from disbelief. "You still think this can be fixed?" "I think it has to be," he said. That night, the investors held an emergency conference call. Daniel was not invited. His CFO called him after, voice tight with protocol. "They're considering freezing your access," he said. "The scandal as justification. Until the inquiry resolves. They're using." Daniel stood in his study, staring at the wall where Lindsay's clinic plans still hung. "And the board? They're split. But the media heat is making them lean cautious." When the call ended, Daniel remained standing. For a long time. Emily entered quietly. "They're pushing you out," she said, not as a question. He nodded once. "And it's my fault." "No," he replied sharply. "It's theirs. For needing someone to blame." She crossed the room, stood beside him before the sketches of the clinic. "This place," she said, pointing to the center layout. "Lindsay's dream. You showed me this. Told me it was." "It was," he said. "It still is," she replied. His eyes met hers. "Then let them take the company," she said. "Let them smear your name. But don't let them kill this." The next morning, Daniel made a decision. He called in every favor he had left. Not from boardrooms, not from power brokers. From people Lindsay had once known. Former students. Former patients. Nurses who had trained under her. Doctors who had worked beside her, staff from the old community college where her plaque still hung on a forgotten wall. And then he made a call to the press. Not to deny the stories, not to deflect. To tell a different one. He invited the media to a press conference. No suits. No stage. Just a public park where Lindsay had once volunteered, where a rusted bench still bore her name. He stood beside that bench with Emily next to him, wind tugging at their jackets. "I'm not here to defend myself," he began. "I'm here to clarify something." He told them about Lindsay. About her vision. About the clinic. He told them about Emily, not in vague terms, not as a mistake or a misunderstood figure. He told them she had been one of Lindsay's most gifted students, that she had fallen through the cracks, and that she had found her way back not through pity, but through perseverance. "This isn't a scandal," he said. "It's a story about timing. About loss. And about hope." The media asked questions, their tones skeptical. But the cameras stayed, and the microphones remained in place. Emily spoke too. Not to defend herself, but to reclaim her voice. "I didn't ask for this attention," she said. "I didn't ask to be a headline. But I will say this, if my presence here forces people to see what they usually ignore, then fine. Let them see me. But don't stop at me. Look around. This city is full of people like me. Survivors. Fighters. People with names and stories and skills. We're not burdens. We're just invisible." The next day, the tide began to shift. A few online voices changed tone. Articles appeared not condemning, but questioning the media's rush to vilify. And then, unexpectedly, an investor publicly supported Daniel's plan for the clinic. Others followed. Not many. But enough. Enough to hold the project in place. Enough to buy time. Enough to remind both of them that even in the heart of scandal, truth could still breathe. Days after the press conference, the city's pulse began to change. What once buzzed with scandal now simmered with reflection. The story that had nearly crushed Daniel's name was shifting. Slowly, yes, and not without resistance, but something had cracked open. Public curiosity no longer fixated on the photograph of a homeless woman beside a millionaire. Instead, people started to ask questions that mattered. Who was Lindsay Whitmore? Why had her vision been buried under years of silence? And what did it mean that someone like Emily Carter had resurfaced through all the noise, not as a mystery, but as a mirror? Inside the guest house, Emily tried to make sense of it all. She spent her mornings writing again. Filling the margins of her notebooks with clinical notes, case studies she remembered, questions she had no answer for yet. Her mind was returning to the rhythm of study, of focus, of purpose. Still, despite the growing public empathy, she felt the quiet pressure of being seen. Not just noticed, but interpreted. People had begun to craft stories about her, stories she couldn't control. Some praised her as a symbol of hope. Others used her as a cautionary tale. Very few saw the full truth. One night, Daniel returned from a long day of meetings with community leaders and philanthropic advisors. His shoulders were tight, his steps slow. But his face carried something different, an intensity not dulled by exhaustion. "I need to show you something," he said. Emily followed him into the main house. Instead of the study, he led her to the room at the end of the hall, the one where he had stored Lindsay's old files. The door creaked open, revealing boxes stacked neatly, labeled by year. Daniel pointed to one marked, Personal, 2011. It was the year she died. He said. I hadn't looked through that one in a long time. They sat on the floor together, opening folders, flipping through pages. Photographs. Letters. Medical journals annotated in Lindsay's handwriting. And then, tucked between 2 volumes of lecture notes, Emily found a manila envelope with her name on it. Not E. Not a letter guessed to be hers. Her full name. Emily Carter. She opened it with trembling hands. Inside were copies of academic records, a printed recommendation letter Lindsay had written, and a personal note, handwritten in Lindsay's strong but flowing script. I don't know if she ever got this. Lindsay had written at the top. Me, I want someone to make sure she doesn't get lost. But if something happens to... Emily's breath caught. Daniel leaned closer. Let me read it. She nodded, handing it to him. He read aloud, voice quiet but steady. Emily Carter is not only academically gifted, she is emotionally prepared for the demands of healthcare. I have never encountered a student with such natural compassion under pressure. Her circumstances are complicated. Her home life is difficult. But she carries herself with humility and grace. If I had a daughter, I would hope she'd have Emily's strength. The silence that followed was heavy, filled with the weight of words meant to bridge a future Lindsay never lived to see. Emily folded the letter carefully and held it to her chest. She tried. Emily whispered. She tried to protect me even after. Daniel didn't speak. He didn't need to. Later that night, Emily stood at the window of the guest house, watching the city lights flicker against the dusk. She had read the letter a dozen times by then, memorized every curve of Lindsay's pen. It was more than a recommendation. It was an anchor. The following morning, Daniel entered the guest house holding a letter of his own. It was from a foundation, one of the few still standing by him. They had offered a grant, not massive, but enough to fund the initial phase of Lindsay's clinic. Enough to build a temporary facility. Enough to begin. They asked if I'd name it after myself. Daniel said. But I told them no. It was never mine. Emily looked up from her notebook. Then whose name? He placed the letter on the table beside her. Lindsay's. And yours? She blinked. Mine. He nodded. You're the reason it's happening. She dreamed it. You brought it back. Emily didn't respond immediately. Her instinct was to reject the spotlight, to avoid the exposure. But something in her had changed. She had carried shame for so long, she had nearly forgotten what it felt like to hold pride. If we're doing this, she said, then we do it right. Not just a clinic. Not just a building. A training program. Scholarships. We pull people in, not just patch them up and send them out. Daniel smiled. You already sound like a founder. She closed the notebook and met his eyes. We both are. Over the next week, the project accelerated. Daniel restructured his team, bypassing the executives who had abandoned him. He appointed Emily as an advisor, not in name only, but with decision-making power. She began to attend meetings, her presence still causing double takes, but now with growing respect. She spoke rarely, but when she did, people listened. Her insights were sharp, practical, born of lived experience and not hypothetical theory. Meanwhile, stories began to shift in tone. Journalists who had once chased her for scandal now asked for interviews. She declined most. She gave one, carefully. Not to glorify herself, but to honor Lindsay and explain the clinic's mission. The headline the next day read, "From the Street to the Front Lines, Emily Carter helps bring late nurses' vision to life." It wasn't perfect. It wasn't even fully true. But it was closer. One evening, after a long planning session, Emily sat alone in the study, reviewing training materials. The house was quiet. Daniel had stepped out to meet a donor. She flipped through pages until her eyes caught a photo she hadn't seen before, Lindsay, in a hospital hallway, standing beside a young woman in scrubs. Her heart stopped. It was her. Someone had captured it years ago. She hadn't known. But there it was, proof of a moment that had once felt fleeting, now immortalized on paper. She traced the outline of Lindsay's face. Her own. Their connection, no longer just a memory or a coincidence. A truth, finally recognized. She leaned back in the chair, eyes closed, letting the moment settle in her chest. Lindsay had seen her. Daniel had believed in her. Now, the world would too. By the end of the month, the city had grown accustomed to hearing Emily Carter's name. What had once been a footnote in a scandal had transformed into a symbol of reinvention, though the reality was far more complex than most headlines dared to explore. Emily didn't seek admiration. She sought progress. The momentum behind the clinic's development was real. Now, land had been secured, architectural drafts were underway, and applications for the pilot staff training program had already begun arriving. People who once dismissed her as a shadow in a photograph were now approaching her with respect, and in some cases, apologies. She accepted neither praise nor regret easily. Instead, she redirected the attention toward the work. Toward Lindsay's vision, toward the lives yet to be saved. But as public support grew, so did resistance from those who saw her emergence as a threat. A small faction within Daniel's company, executives with political aspirations and financial entanglements, began pushing back. They claimed Daniel's insistence on the clinic project, especially in partnership with someone like Emily, undermined the corporate brand. It wasn't subtle. It wasn't veiled. They painted her presence as a liability to shareholders and a distraction from Daniel's responsibilities as CEO. A formal notice was issued. The board would hold a vote. Daniel's position was in question. Not just his authority, but his future in the company he had built from the ground up. The evening before the meeting, Emily found Daniel in the study, his back to her, hands braced on the windowsill. Papers littered the desk behind him, some marked in red, others folded with annotations. She stepped in without speaking, waiting until he acknowledged her presence with a tired glance over his shoulder. "They're not just trying to remove me," he said. "They want to erase this. All of it." Emily sat in the chair nearest the doorway, posture steady. "Then you fight." He turned to her fully now. "I don't know how much longer I can. They've pulled everything they could, old contracts, exaggerated mistakes, even a few well-placed stories accusing me of emotional instability. They want to break the foundation under my feet before I can use it to build." She didn't blink. "Then we make noise." Daniel's brow furrowed. "What kind of noise?" "The kind they can't ignore," she replied. "To go on offense. You've been defending yourself long enough. It's time." The next morning, they arrived early to the company's downtown headquarters. The boardroom was on the 32nd floor, with panoramic views of the city skyline and a long, polished table at its center. The men and women seated around it wore faces molded from decades of corporate experience, composed, indifferent, tactical. They expected resistance. They did not expect Emily. Daniel entered first, head held high. Emily followed. There were whispers. Glances. But no one interrupted as she took her seat beside him, hands folded, silent but certain. The chairman cleared his throat. Mr. Whitmore, we've gathered today to discuss the nature of your recent actions and the implications they pose for the stability of this corporation. Daniel nodded. Understood. I'd like to begin with a presentation. Murmurs rose around the table. The chairman gestured curtly. Proceed. Daniel stepped forward, his voice clear and precise. He didn't list financial metrics or defend leadership decisions. He told them about Lindsay. About her death. About her dream. Then he shifted the projector to a series of slides, blueprints for the clinic, photographs from shelters, testimonials from applicants to the program. And then, he introduced Emily. The room shifted. I'd like you to meet someone, he said. We're still relevant at all. Not just the reason I'm here today, but the reason. Emily stood. She didn't fidget. She didn't apologize. She didn't explain her past. Instead, she told them the truth. I'm not here for pity, she said. I'm not here because Daniel saved me. I'm here because your company, like this city, has ignored people like me for too long. But I survived. I studied. I worked. I cared for patients before I was even licensed to. I watched them die. I watched them heal. I watched the system fail over and over again. And when I met Daniel, I didn't ask for a handout. I asked for leftovers. He offered me a table. Her voice did not tremble. This clinic isn't about redemption. It's about reality. It's about building something that acknowledges the failures we pretend don't exist. And if that threatens your image, maybe it's your image that needs changing. Silence followed. No one moved. Daniel stepped forward once more. I'm not stepping down. And if you vote to remove me, understand that you'll be doing so in full view of the public. Because after this meeting, we're taking this story national. Every camera. Every outlet. And not just about the clinic, but about the choice you made in this room. He looked around the table. Choose wisely. The vote did not go as expected. It passed, but not in favor of removal. The deciding vote came from a board member who had once been silent in every meeting. A woman in her 60s who rarely spoke above a whisper. She voted to retain Daniel, citing the clinic as the first meaningful initiative this company has touched in years. When they exited the building, cameras awaited them. This time, Daniel didn't shield Emily. She stood beside him, eyes steady, shoulders back. And when the questions came, some respectful, some sharp, she answered them plainly. We're building something, she said. And we're just getting started. That night, Daniel sat on the steps of the guest house while Emily brewed tea inside. He watched the lights across the city flicker to life, the weight of the vote still settling in his chest. The fight wasn't over, but for the first time, he felt like they were no longer reacting to fire. They were shaping something from the ashes. Emily stepped out and handed him a cup. He looked at her, tired but resolute. You know they're going to keep coming after us, he said. She sat beside him. Let them, she replied. They sipped in silence, the city humming below, the clinic's foundation, literal and symbolic, finally beginning to take root. The foundation had been laid. What started as a fragile alliance under scrutiny had evolved into a public mission with traction, attention, and unexpected support. The vote of confidence Daniel received from the board echoed beyond corporate walls, reaching circles that had previously dismissed the clinic as either charity or controversy. Now it was a beacon. And at its center stood Emily, not as a symbol, not as a face for marketing, but as an architect of its framework. With Daniel's authority intact and the media storm losing momentum, the clinic's development accelerated. The first location, a compact but functional facility in the Tenderloin district, began construction under the supervision of a hybrid team, experienced professionals paired with individuals who had once lived on the margins. It wasn't just a building. It was a statement. Emily now split her days between planning sessions, program design, and mentorship. She was no longer the girl who had once asked for leftovers on a sidewalk. She was becoming what Lindsay had seen in her from the beginning, a leader formed not by ambition, but by endurance. But even progress carries a cost. With every step forward, Emily found herself pulled between past and present. Her story was no longer entirely her own. She walked into meetings where her presence was expected to inspire. Into classrooms where her words carried more weight than she ever intended, and into interviews where journalists attempted to distill years of hardship into a soundbite. She refused most requests. The ones she accepted were chosen carefully. She had no interest in mythologizing herself. She spoke only of the work, of Lindsay, and of the systems that still needed dismantling. One morning, while finalizing curriculum for the clinic's training program, Emily received an envelope at the guest house. There was no return address, just her name in blue ink. Inside, a letter. Handwritten. The penmanship was familiar but older, slightly unsteady. Emily. It began. I saw you on television. I wasn't sure it was you at first. But then I remembered your eyes. Your mother had the same ones. Her breath caught. She read on. I don't know if I deserve a response. I didn't deserve much of anything, not after what I did. But I've been sober for almost 6 years. And when I saw you standing next to that man, speaking the way you did, I felt like maybe I hadn't failed entirely. I'm not asking for anything. I just wanted you to know, I'm still here. And I'm proud of you. It was signed by her father. Emily folded the letter slowly. The past, once something she had learned to live around, now re-emerged with breath and bones. She had not thought of him in years, not since he left. Without a word, vanishing into the cracks of addiction and fear. Seeing his words now didn't stir anger. It stirred silence. A complicated silence that felt like closure trying to form. She did not show the letter to Daniel. She tucked it into the back of her notebook, uncertain whether to respond. She had too much in motion now, too many lives attached to her choices. Meanwhile, support for the clinic began to snowball. Donations increased. Applications for the training program flooded in from across the city. Formerly unhoused individuals, ex-addicts, survivors of domestic violence, all with experience, all seeking purpose. Emily interviewed each one personally, not out of protocol, but because she believed in meeting eyes, not reading resumes. In one such interview, she sat across from a woman named Tanya. Mid-30s. Soft-spoken. She had survived the streets, battled addiction, lost custody of her children, and still found the strength to keep going. I used to be a nurse. Tanya said quietly. Before everything. Emily nodded. You still are. Tanya's hands trembled. You think they'll let someone like me wear that uniform again? They won't just let you. Emily said. They'll need you. That same evening, Daniel returned from a conference in Chicago, where he had presented the clinic's model to a panel of public health leaders. He found Emily on the back porch, reviewing transcripts by lamplight. They want to replicate it, he said. 3 cities. Initial interest. She looked up, brow furrowed. He nodded. She didn't answer. I told them it had to be you. She looked away. That's not what I do. It is now. Already. But they want a figurehead. Someone who'll travel. Speak. Advise. Emily exhaled. I'm not sure I want to be known. Daniel sat beside her. You're not being known. You're being heard. There's a difference. She was quiet a long time before responding. Never supposed to be a franchise. If we expand too fast, we lose control. This was. It's not. But it can be a model. A movement. She closed the folder. Then we do it slow. We do it right. One center at a time. And only with the people who've lived it. No one else gets to lead. He smiled. Agreed. Over the next weeks, they prepared the official launch. The first clinic. Lindsay House. Would open in less than a month. Staff were hired. Equipment installed. Flyers distributed to shelters. Libraries, bus stations. The first open day would include free checkups, mental health screenings, hot meals, and community introductions. Emily rehearsed her speech quietly. Not because she needed the words to be perfect, but because she needed them to be real. On the eve of the launch, she returned once more to the spot where she had met Daniel, the bench near Union Square. It was empty now. The same lights. The same breeze. But she was different. She sat for a moment, holding her letter from her father, thinking of Lindsay, thinking of the winding road that had somehow led her here. A passerby, young and gaunt, hovered near the trash bin. Emily stood and approached him. You hungry? She asked. He looked at her, startled. I've got something better than leftovers. She added, handing him a card with the clinics information. He stared at it, confused. You work there? She smiled. I built it. And with that, she walked back toward the future she had chosen to create, deliberate. Imperfect, but entirely her own. The morning of the clinic's official launch arrived with a crisp sky and a quiet calm that seemed out of place given the scale of the moment. Lindsay House stood nestled between 2 worn brick buildings on a street long forgotten by developers and tourists. Yet today, it pulsed with activity. Volunteers set up folding chairs and tables, boxes of medical supplies were unpacked. With practiced urgency, and a modest banner was hung above the entrance. It read simply, Lindsay House, for care. For hope. For good. Emily arrived before sunrise. She walked through the newly painted hallways in silence, fingers grazing the walls as if absorbing the last quiet breath before the doors opened. Each room had been carefully planned, an exam space, a counseling area, a communal kitchen, a classroom. With white boards and stacked chairs. Everything was functional, nothing extravagant. Every detail told a story of intent, dignity without excess, structure without sterility. In the staff room, Tanya and 2 other team members reviewed the day's schedule. They wore matching dark green polo shirts with the clinic's logo embroidered near the collar. Their eyes were bright, not from sleep, but from anticipation. Emily joined them without announcement. They looked up, smiled, and nodded in greeting. She didn't offer a pep talk. She didn't need to. Each of them knew what this place was. They were not employees of a health system, they were the system reborn. By 8 o'clock, a small crowd had gathered outside. Not hundreds, not dozens even. Just people. Some curious. Some cautious. A few old faces Emily recognized from nights spent waiting outside shelters, from shared benches and distant stares. Daniel arrived quietly through the back entrance. He had dressed without flair, as he often did. Now, blending in rather than commanding attention. He found Emily near the reception desk, standing beside a hand-painted mural that depicted a tree with open hands as its branches. "Looks like it's working," he said, voice low. "It's beginning," she replied. He paused before adding, "There's still time to change your mind about the speech." She shook her head. "They don't need a performance. They need consistency." When the doors opened at 9 o'clock, the space came alive. People entered slowly, guided. Not by uniformed staff but by peers, people who greeted them by name, who remembered birthdays, who offered water before asking questions. Medical volunteers checked vitals. Case managers provided referrals. The kitchen served lentil soup and bread, nothing flashy but warm and filling. Emily remained in motion. She greeted, directed, answered questions. When someone asked where the founder was, she simply smiled and gestured to the building itself. By mid-morning, a small press contingent arrived. They had been invited with strict instructions: no cameras inside, no personal questions. Only coverage of the work. Most respected the terms. A few tried to steer conversations toward Emily's past. She deflected with ease. "This isn't about who I was," she told one reporter. "It's about what we're doing now." One moment near noon stood out. A boy, no older than 7, sat beside his mother in the waiting area. He had fallen silent after an injury at a local park days earlier, refusing to speak or eat much. Emily crouched beside him, holding a small rubber ball from the toy box. "Want to trade?" she asked gently, offering a green one in exchange for the red he clutched. He stared at her, then nodded. She smiled. "That's a good trade." Minutes later, in the exam room, he spoke his first word in days: "Thank you." By afternoon, the first shift of volunteers rotated out, and the second wave stepped in. Emily took a moment to herself in the courtyard behind the clinic. A small herb garden had been planted in raised beds, donated by a local nonprofit. She knelt, brushing her fingers through the rosemary, the scent sharp and grounding. Daniel joined her moments later, holding 2 paper cups of coffee. "You missed lunch," he said, handing her one. "I wasn't hungry." He sat beside her on the stone bench. For a moment, they said nothing. Then he asked, "You ever think about leaving this city?" "Do?" She considered the question. "Something that can outlast me." "Sometimes. But it's not about leaving anymore. It's about growing. You could lead clinics in other cities," he said. "Travel. Expand. Eventually." She replied. "But not yet." He nodded, respecting the weight of her pace. That evening, after the clinic closed its doors for the day, the staff gathered in the central hall. There was no formal celebration, just shared leftovers and quiet laughter. Emily stood beside the mural, watching the light shift through the front windows as the sun lowered. Tanya approached with a folder. "Applications for the second training cohort." she said. We've already got more than expected. Emily took the folder, flipping through the names. They're ready. Tanya added. We're ready. Emily smiled. Then let's get to work. When she left the clinic that night, walking back through the neighborhood she once wandered aimlessly, she no longer felt like an outsider. She had not reclaimed her place in society. She had rewritten it. She wasn't looking for an invitation to return to where she'd once been. She was building where she wanted to be. Daniel waited for her near the guest house, leaning against the fence, eyes soft beneath the street lamp. How was it? He asked. Honest. She replied. He handed her a letter. This came for you today. The envelope bore the name of a university. Inside, a letter of acceptance. A scholarship for returning students in the healthcare field. Full tuition. Flexible schedule. Classes beginning in the fall. Emily folded it once and held it in her palm. You're going back. Daniel said. I'm moving forward. She corrected. Together, they walked inside, no speeches, no toasts, just the quiet rhythm of steps taken in the direction of something real. Months passed. Seasons shifted. The summer light mellowed into autumn's golden hush, and San Francisco's air grew cooler, but no less alive. The leaves in the clinic's courtyard browned and fell, swept into neat piles by volunteers who had once lined the sidewalks in search of shelter. The rhythm of Lindsay House grew steady, no longer marked by the rush of a new launch, but by the daily pulse of something durable, patients arriving, community members returning, programs unfolding with the quiet certainty of purpose realized. Emily's world had transformed, not in grand, theatrical arcs, but in the details. She woke early. Now not to survive the day, but to shape it. Her mornings began with coffee and coursework, her evenings with training sessions or reflection walks through neighborhoods where her name was once unknown. Her story had spread, carefully, reluctantly, but undeniably. And with that visibility came opportunities she had once dismissed as unreachable. Her enrollment at the university's continuing education program became official by October. She attended classes part-time, balancing lectures on pathology and care management with real-life experience at the clinic. Her professors, aware of her unique trajectory, never treated her with reverence or pity. They challenged her, just as Lindsay once had, recognizing that her presence in their classrooms enriched the curriculum itself. Daniel remained close, though no longer at the center of headlines or controversy. After the successful launch of Lindsay House, he stepped down from several board positions and began consulting privately. He diverted much of his energy into establishing a foundation in Lindsay's name, one focused on creating healthcare models rooted in empathy and lived experience. He no longer chased influence. He cultivated impact. Their relationship, once defined by imbalance, one man with means, one woman with need, had evolved into something quiet and interdependent. They shared meals, not out of obligation, but routine. They disagreed sometimes, especially about pace and policy, but always returned to a shared core belief that people were worth fighting for, even when the world made it inconvenient. In November, Emily received an invitation from the college where she had once studied nursing before her life had fractured. It was for a guest lecture series titled Where We Begin Again. Her name was printed at the bottom of the flyer, followed by the description, Advocate, Nurse in Training, Director of Lindsay House. She declined the stage, but sent a recorded message instead. I didn't return to finish what I started. She said in the video. I came back to learn differently. My education didn't stop when I left school, it just moved outside. Onto sidewalks. Into shelters. Inside systems that forgot the people they claimed to serve. Now, I'm building something that listens. That sees. And I hope you do the same. Applause followed the recording. Emails from students arrived the next day. Some asking questions. Others just saying thank you. The holidays approached. The clinic remained open, offering shelter, hot meals, and access to care throughout the season. Volunteers decorated modestly, paper snowflakes hung from ceilings, strings of warm white lights draped above the front entrance. One evening, as Emily locked up for the night, she found a small box wrapped in brown paper sitting at the reception desk. No note. Inside, a stethoscope. New. Engraved with her name. She didn't need to ask who had left it. She placed it in her bag and walked home through streets illuminated by shop displays and distant laughter. Her path no longer felt like a return. It was forward motion, marked not by recovery, but by emergence. Then, in late December, she received another invitation, this time from the restaurant near Union Square. The place where it had all begun. The owner, having followed her story, asked if she would consider hosting a community night. A gathering of students, residents, and those who had once been unhoused. A meal served not for profit, but for remembrance. Emily considered it for days before agreeing. Not out of sentimentality, but intention. The evening was quiet, well attended, respectful. No cameras. No press. Just people. She wore a simple black coat, arrived early, and stood near the same bench where she had once asked a stranger for his leftovers. Daniel joined her. He wore no suit, no tie. Just an open expression. Inside, the tables filled with voices, students from her new program, clinic staff, familiar faces from the street, and a few professors who had come to listen, not speak. She stood near the front only once, just long enough to say, "Thank you for sharing this meal. I hope we keep sharing." The night unfolded gently after that. No declarations. No big reveals. At one point, Emily stepped outside for air. The city was quiet, the wind light. Across the street, near the same bench where she had once stood with empty hands and a full heart, she saw someone, young, thin, layered in mismatched clothes, eyes scanning the sidewalks not with malice, but with need. She crossed without hesitation. He flinched as she approached. "Hey," she said, voice even. He didn't reply. She sat beside him. After a moment, she turned and asked softly, "May I join you, sir?" He looked at her, surprised, unsure. Then nodded. She offered him a card. Not just a name or a number. A place. A clinic. A beginning. They sat for a while without speaking. Around them, the city continued, cars humming past, lights blinking in windows, lives colliding in unseen rhythms. But on that corner, a circle closed. Not an ending. A return, rebuilt. A life redefined not by where it broke, but where it grew.